Welcome to Show Me the Money podcast that's more Tyra Banks than trading floor. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire, and each week we discuss how money shows up in some of our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary.
And today we are going in a bit of a time machine back to the noughties, and we're going to talk all about America's Next Top Model, which has been back in the news recently as there's been a documentary about it, but we're going to have a look at the whole series. There were loads of different cycles of it, and I don't know about you, but I was so bought into this when it came out. I was actually shocked to realise that the first series was 2003, so I was like 11 when it first came out. I didn't realise I was that young.
I don't know if I started watching it right from the start, but I was definitely invested in that like heyday period. And I would like watch it every week. I would have like my preferred person and I would be devastated if they went out. I was obsessed with the makeover episode.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
It is the most batshit show. And I think that's what this documentary goes into. Like, I'm really surprised in actual fact that it's taken this long for there to be a documentary about it or to be any kind of reckoning, because as the like documentary points out, actually a lot of the discourse around America's Next Top Model and how batshit it was and how truly insane some of the things they got them to do was kind of like during the pandemic.
Although to be honest, I don't think I saw that. Like, I don't know, I was on a different side of TikTok, but I didn't really see this kind of revival of people discovering it for the first time in 2020.
Yeah, I seem to remember that like a little bit about it, but I wasn't really properly on top of it. I think it is part of a wider trend that we've seen that has been a reckoning for some of these like frankly vicious reality TV shows that we had around the time. So what it kind of reminded me of, and actually we can talk about like the attitudes of the creators in a little bit more depth, but the kind of sticking to their guns and like still defending the program really reminded me of Should I Delete That, when they did the body image series and they got on like the exec producer of Super Size versus Super Skinny. And you could hear them finding it quite difficult to interview her because she was not taking any notes or any accountability for the potential like damage that show did. And I think we see the same pattern here. But yeah, there's been like a broader, I think, sort of reckoning for some of these TV shows. And things like The X Factor and Pop Idol, where like they essentially were making money from humiliating people, and you could see like them almost rub their hands with glee when someone came on stage who looked like they were going to be absolutely shit. And that's why like Susan Boyle was such a phenomenon, because she came on stage and they thought that she was going to be ridiculed, and then she had this incredible voice. So I think there's a lot of people have a lot to answer for from that period, and a lot of people made an absolutely shitload of money essentially from like I guess exploiting people to a degree.
And just to kind of, I guess, give a bit of background, I'm sure most people know the format of America's Next Top Model and how it ran, but effectively each episode it was a case of you had these contestants, and it was so popular that there were these queues, like hordes of young women wanted to be contestant. They wanted to be selected on ANTM. And basically there was a short list of them, and they each week had to go through these challenges. And there were these photo shoot challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which were quite out there. They weren't your normal modelling challenges that you would see. They were very pushing the edges of creativity, I would say, like past the edges.
Absolutely. And obviously you get it as a TV show that there was always a theme per week, and obviously you kind of have to have that, but some of the themes were crazy. And one of the things I think that like came up in the documentary was these models saying like that I couldn't use any of these images in my portfolio.
They're totally useless.
Absolutely. Like,
what is the point of me dressed as like a seventh deadly sin?
Here I am as a fish.
Yeah.
Here I am, you know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's the ones where they were literally like fish in the fish market with real fish. And it's like, what is this?
I know. But the format would be that, you know, there would be sort of some storytelling and some drama. There would be the theme of the week. They'd have to do like these challenges. So they would go out on like go-sees where they'd be told all kinds of horrible things about themselves. And then it would sort of culminate in a photo shoot. And then they'd essentially choose the best photo and have it blown up on the wall. And that girl would be safe.
Yes.
And then they would kind of go through all of the drama. They would have the 2 worst photos, and then Tyra would like very dramatically give the photo to the person who could stay in. And then there was the whole like, you are no longer in the running to becoming America's Next Top Model, which is the most long-winded sort of iconic line
like you're
in
fired.
existence. Yeah. Like the
so
short
iconic.
version would be you're fired. This version was you are no longer in the running towards becoming America's Next Top Model.
Yeah, please return to the apartment and pack your bags and leave and everything. I find this quite hard to talk about because obviously we're so far in the future, but I know that as a like young teen, like I completely idolized this show. Like, and I think that was the experience from like hearing a lot of people talk about it. Like it was such a big show and it was so influential. And you mentioned it a second ago, but one of the like real landmarks of it was the makeovers. And it was like a couple of weeks into the series. And again, now thinking about it, there were some crazy things that happened on those makeovers. But effectively, it was like, okay, you girls, we've kind of scooped you off the streets, like from wherever you're from, and we're going to turn you into supermodels. And we're going to do whatever we want to because we're the experts. And I mean, I guess I probably thought when I was younger, like, I would love that to happen. Like, I would love this glam squad to come and do whatever to make me over into a supermodel. But again, they were really quite extreme with some of it. And it feels a bit like they chose certain people that they were going to kind of just like make a little bit of a mockery out of, whereas some had quite subtle like changes and looked really nice. It wasn't like a consistent approach.
Yeah, and they would really like in the edit sort of you would have someone who was like, the only thing I don't want you to do is to cut off my hair, and they would have this amazing long hair and they would be the one who ended up with like a crop.
Yeah.
And sometimes the makeovers like wouldn't work out, or they weren't the way that Tyra envisaged them. So they would come back. Like I remember there was one girl where she had all her hair cut really short, and then Tyra was like, no, you look like shit. So they had to then put extensions in, it would be cut really short, but then they would just completely shave it off. It was it was quite brutal. And then, you know, there was a lot of like cosmetic dentistry that happened. And my mum has had like really extensive dental treatment, and there are some things that like if they botch it, you just can't, like there's nothing that you can do. And so it's a really interesting, you know, we all love a makeover. Like makeover montages are such like a hallmark of any movie from the 90s. But it's a very different lens that we're looking back on it with now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of, again, brings me on to like the first topic that I want to get into, which I guess is the promise versus like the reality of these TV shows. Because one of the big headlines of America's Next Top Model, of course, was like the promise of this career, the prize, like the cover girl contract, the $100,000. And ultimately, that's what people were chasing. Like these girls wanted that, I guess, fast track to that lifestyle. And I think one of the things that was quite shocking watching the documentary is actually how few of those women that won the competition actually made it into a successful career, and actually whether the programme made it harder for them to have a successful career. And in the Shameless episode that they talk about this, they say that they think, and I mean, one of the winners, Danny, talks about this as well, but that had she not gone on the program, like she had everything about her that she could have succeeded as a model, and actually the program probably ruined her career in a way.
Yeah. And do you think that kind of back in the day, obviously this was before we had like Instagram and TikTok, which is somewhere where you don't, like, the gatekeepers don't matter. You could build your own personal brand on there. I know of several people, in fact, who have sort of essentially like created their own portfolio on their Instagram. So there's an amazing model called Stephanie Yeboah. She like for years and years has just been taking like really beautiful, really interesting photos of herself. And it has culminated in like real modeling opportunities. Yeah. But especially in the early seasons of ANTM, this probably was the only way that some of these girls would be able to make it through. They just didn't have that access to find like a following or find a public. Whereas if you have like a Danny now, like someone could take photos of them or they could do self-portraits and probably makes them cut through on socials, being so striking, having such like a vibrant personality. But yeah, that wasn't an option back then. It's a bit like we said before, other kinds of talent shows, because that's essentially what America's Next Top Model was. It was like a talent show.
Yeah, and you're reliant on those gatekeepers, the people that are involved in the show, to get you those jobs and to like give you that leg up in the career in a way that, like you say, doesn't exist now. And I think I found it really sad actually when she said that she found out like years later that Tyra kind of admitted that she knew that actually in the like noughties, being on a TV show, a reality TV show, wasn't considered to be like something that's like quite normal or good, whereas now obviously again it launches people's careers quite nicely sometimes. Like the Molly May effect did not happen then. It was like the complete opposite, and actually you were almost blacklisted and not able to access certain opportunities because you'd been on a reality TV show.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to the point of like they weren't only filming these girls in like a professional environment, all of their behind the scenes, so all of their stupid arguments, all of the like cattiness, all of the sort of like ugly side of what happens when you make people compete against each other and also live together. All of that was also exposed. So and you know, the edit does a lot of work. They would often edit girls to seem as though they were difficult to work with. Tyra would make comments that sort of almost like defined a girl's personality. And I suppose even if someone's done really well in the end or they've won, if you are a casting agent or, you know, a kind of talent manager at a modelling agency, and you've seen this edited version of someone, which is that they are difficult to work with, you're not going to pick them up. So I think there's like a real vulnerability to it for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it applies like more broadly as well, doesn't it, to other reality TV shows? And like I feel like there's been so many examples with like X Factor and Pop Idol, and where again you kind of see these people be promised this dream or sold this dream, and even when they win the program and they get that kind of 1 year guarantee of like a contract or whatever, ultimately there's so much more to being successful as a model or as a pop star than just like winning the competition. Like you need to have those people that are powerful on your team, and if they're not, then ultimately like you just end up back where you started. And I mean, how many like pop stars or Pop Idol or X Factor winners have actually made it?
Yeah, and a lot of people have come out and talked about being chewed up and spit out by like the show and by production. You know, Leona Lewis certainly has had a lot to say. Like Rebecca Ferguson. I think, you know, it was really easy to forget that these were like human beings being really pushed to their limit.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, in America's Next Top Model, they would really push people in terms of like discomfort, in terms of pain, in terms of like emotional pain as well. Like on the shoots, they would have people be like absolutely freezing to that they would have people pass out, like, and it was all just part of the drama. It does seem really, really mad that I think they had like real free creative reign. But I don't think I'd ever clocked, because I was like watching this as sort of a teenager, and it wouldn't have been something that I was like thinking about or interested in at the time. I didn't realise that Tyra Banks was like the brains behind it all, and it was her idea and it was her baby, rather than just being kind of the like host and presenter.
And I think it is worth talking about that bit as well, because she talks about that in this documentary, about the fact that actually like the idea from it came from quite a good place, because she wanted to increase the diversity in the industry and open it up to a lot of girls who would never have had access to being models. And I think you do see that because there's quite a lot of a range of like socioeconomic backgrounds in terms of the girls that we see come into it. And actually, like from that perspective, I do think that like there are some like positives that you can take from it. But again, and I think this about just reality TV back in the noughties, 2010s generally, I wonder how much those contestants that were going for it and applying really knew about the like reality of what they were getting involved in. I think now it's so different. Like, you know, people go on Love Island because they want to be influencers now. Like, and it's nothing like that. They have a end goal. Like, they're not looking for love. Whereas with this and like with those shows back in the day, like, you just didn't have as much like knowledge of what the industry was like because they were still quite fresh and new. And like you say, there was that access issue to getting careers in those places. But also I just think like maybe there was a bit more naivety and I guess hope for contestants, which is kind of quite sad, because it kind of feels like they signed themselves up, they got involved, and then they were kind of at the mercy of these story writers. And they talk about this as well on the show and on the Shameless podcast again that I was listening to. The fact that actually like there were story writers. And actually, do you know what the first time I realised this was, which completely shocked me, was Dolly Alderton talking about the fact that she was like a script writer for Made in Chelsea. And like it makes me feel really stupid that it didn't occur to me that like there were script writers.
I mean, you watch Made in Chelsea and it does feel like sort of, I don't know, it doesn't feel, it's not how you talk to your mates in real life, is it? But no, I think, I don't know, I think going back to your point about kind of people's socioeconomic background being relevant, and the fact that like, I suppose you can see it in two different ways. You can see it as, yes, it was giving a chance to those people who might not have access to this world. But if you're being less generous in your view, then you can see it as, we will target people for whom this would never be an opportunity, because they'll do whatever we want. And it will make really good TV, and they don't know what they're doing. So they're going to make mistakes, and that's going to make us a lot of money. That's going to get us a lot of viewers. And I think it was Louis Walsh. There is a really famous clip from the Boyzone documentary about him saying like, it's something along the lines of like, you always choose a certain type of people because they'll do whatever you want.
Really?
And I think it's the people who are so desperate for it. And like we've discussed it in a previous episode when we were talking about the about the like child influencers. The fact that it was seen as like a way out. So this little crew that Piper Roquette had, their parents were like pushing them into it because it was like potentially the only way out and the only way up. You know, and they did really emphasize that in certain girls' storylines as well. So you had Shandy, who's like probably one of the big tragedies, I suppose, of the whole franchise. And we can talk about that a bit more in a minute. But you know, they really went very hard and heavy on the fact that like she worked at a Walgreens, and there was a lot of this like, well, if you don't want to get into that freezing tank of water, or if you don't want to let this lechy man put his hands all over you, you can go back to stacking shelves at Dairy Queen. And that was like a real strong, like, a lot of it was like, well, if you don't want to go back to being poor, you'll just do whatever the fuck we want you to.
And you definitely get that from the attitude of Tyra, I think, in like a lot of the conversations that she feels. Again, I feel a bit mixed on whether she had like real good intentions or what she was doing with it, but she feels this kind of like big sister role, like I've scooped you out of like this terrible situation, I've given you this platform and you're wasting it type of attitude. And I mean, ultimately it's not her decision, like it's up to the individuals as to whether they want to go along with her weird and like wild requests. But there definitely was that attitude of like almost like I'm a bit of a savior.
Absolutely. And I suppose Tyra's attitude towards like that kind of you do whatever it takes to be successful didn't just extend to the contestants, it extended to like the whole show. And obviously it was her baby. You can see where her drive comes from. She says right at the top that, you know, she was like, part of her motivation was that she was really sick as one of the only black supermodels of like herself and other black models being paid less for the same work, even when there was evidence that they sold issues better. And so, you know, you can see where some of that like drive comes from. And like you said, the casts were always incredibly diverse in terms of like I suppose every way you could cut the cake. I wouldn't say actually that she's been a victim of her own sort of success and drive, because I wouldn't ever see her as a victim. In fact, I don't think that from the documentary anyway, it doesn't seem like Tyra Banks is even remotely reflecting on the fact that maybe they did a few things wrong. Do you think this show could have been a force for good and a way of helping people to access an industry if certain things had been different, or do you think it was just doomed to be what it was from the beginning?
I don't know if I really believe that any reality TV show truly can be solely a force for good, because fundamentally at their core they're an entertainment show. And so I keep thinking again about like One Direction, for example, and like you could look at it, and I mean lots of people do, and think, oh my gosh, like such a huge success. I mean, financially, yes, but in terms of like their lives, I don't know if they would all sit there and say like, this has been really great for my life trajectory. Like, I mean, there's obviously one of them that can't sit there and say anything. Exactly.
Because, you know, I think, you know, that success and the lifestyle obviously like led to the end of his life. So.
Exactly. And even that as one like extreme example, you look at some of the others as well, and they just seem like they, like I'm thinking of Zayn Malik, for example, like he just seems like he's been lost for so long. Like he has had various kind of incidents which haven't really portrayed him like particularly well. Like he obviously had a daughter,
500 quid for the tooth fairy to his daughter.
And then also like had a daughter and then split up with the mum quite early on, and then had a big falling out with the family, and just all of these things that you just can't imagine would have happened had they just carried on with their normal lives. And yes, there's a lot of benefit. You know, I'm never going to say, you know, they're not privileged to have access to all of like the money and means that they have. But I think a lot of famous people and a lot of people that come up through reality TV shows especially are the prime example of like money alone can't buy you happiness.
Yeah. And I do think it's telling that Tyra does not seem to be on very good terms with most of the other people who worked on the show.
Absolutely.
She had like nice things to say about Ken Mock, who essentially, I suppose, if you wanted to choose the villains of the piece, it would be the two of them.
Yeah, and
right?
they were also the two that ultimately like conceptualized it, that were in it together. Like they had as much at stake, and they were both ultimately, I think, like chasing the same success as each other, whereas everyone else in like the kind of sphere relied on them.
Yeah. And I think there's still so much of like the other judges' sort of personas are like, none of them really, for me at least, have like any other thing that I know them for or remember them for apart from America's Next Top Model. So you have like the Jays, or like Miss J, who I found out is like in his late 60s.
Mad.
Which is insane. Still on the documentary looking very fierce. Jay Manuel, who like, obviously we've done the Schitt's Creek episode recently, and I'm still like mid rewatch of the series as a whole, but I think some of the inspiration for David Rose comes from Dan Levy, but I think a lot of it comes from Jay Manuel as well. I was watching
so many
him,
similarities.
I was like, he's so David Rose coded, but he's like this, he's kind of like quite softly spoken, and like I always felt when I was watching it, like if I had to get bad feedback from someone, I would choose like Jay or maybe Nigel.
Yeah.
But please keep Janice away from me at
I
all
know.
costs.
And I
She
thought it was
vicious.
also like interesting that she was not involved at all. Like I would love to know like her reasoning behind it, because I think like they did such a good job of getting all of the others on it, but like she was nasty. Yeah, she was not nice. And I do feel like the others like probably did have like relatively good intentions, and like again that they were probably forced into a lot of, well, we know that from the documentary that there was an element of that, of like being pressured into like doing things that they were uncomfortable with, because that's what like the production team wanted to do. So I do kind of have a bit more like grace for them. I have seen though some interesting kind of like commentary around Tyra as well, as to whether actually a lot of the takes on her are too harsh. And yeah, I just wondered what your thoughts are. Like, having watched the documentary, do you think that it's fair to kind of hold her accountable, or is it again a bigger picture?
I went into watching the documentary as a fan of Tyra Banks. I would have to say, like, right from the Coyote Ugly days, like she, and I actually loved her on America's Next Top Model. Like sometimes I would be like, oh, you're being really harsh, but she was like, I think at the time I really bought into her whole like big sister, mother hen energy. And so I think because I was coming at it from that angle, I found her really disappointing in the documentary. In terms of just, I don't think it's fair to expect her to apologise for everything, or, you know, and I do think that we have to take things like in the context of the time that they happened, right? And one thing that Deborah Francis White says or has said that has always stuck with me is that, like, when you ask for progress, what you're asking for is now to be problematic. And so, like, if we want to spin it in a slightly more positive light, what it is a demonstration of how much progress has been made in terms of the way that we see things and the empathy that we have for people, that we're seeing this in such a problematic light. My issue wasn't that, like, she wasn't on camera being like, oh yeah, I'm just so sorry, like it was all awful. My issue is kind of around the fact that there was no reflection, no authentic reflection.
No.
And that a lot of what she seemed to want to talk about was basically being quite self-congratulatory about the whole thing. And, you know, I suppose you can see it in two ways, can't you? As a work project, obviously it was incredibly successful. And it's the thing that really, like, I suppose propelled her to stardom. So maybe she's viewing it through that lens of like, I wanted success at any cost.
Yeah.
Do we think there was like a cost to Tyra as well? Surely there must have been. It must have been really hard work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like from a like pure work output perspective, like she did it for how many seasons? Like 20 something there were, and I think it probably took a toll on you, but I do feel like that kind of success at all costs is what really comes across. But then I guess there's a question as to, you know, we see this a lot still nowadays. There are plenty of people who will pursue success in their business, and ultimately this was her business, financial success at all costs. And like you say, from that perspective, like she did an incredibly good job in the sense that like it was one of the highest rated series on the network. It was the highest rated show for like over 3 years on the network that it was on. And like the advertising revenue was wild. Like they were charging over $60,000 for a 30-second slot at the peak, which again is like the highest of any on the network. And so from a commercial perspective, like it was doing really well. So again, it's like we now have the ability to look back and to also look through the lens of 2026. But yeah, when you're Tyra Banks sat in your mansion at home, like does she think it was a success? I think probably, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest, this is not the only show or the only business where a handful of people have become incredibly rich and successful off the backs of like people who had a bad time and were exploited. That's most reality TV shows.
Also,
certainly
it's not
like
businesses.
I think I really, you know, if we're going to level criticism at Tyra Banks, you know, you mentioned the Shameless podcast episode on this a couple of times, and they did a comparison to kind of Gordon Ramsay as someone who like shouted a lot and is very passionate in his TV shows in the same way that like Tyra would sometimes shout, especially if it was a girl she was quite invested in. But I think a better comparison actually, if we're going to talk about judging people the same, is like if we're going to level a certain amount of criticism at Tyra Banks, I would like to see at least the same amount of criticism leveled at people like Simon Cowell.
Yeah.
And apparently he's coming back with a new show. Like, I don't know who's going to watch that. Probably way too many people.
But yeah, is it not very similar in many ways? I mean, I imagine he's made far more money as well.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I actually, an old friend of mine who is a chef went and was Simon Cowell's private chef on his yacht for a summer.
What?
I don't know if I'm really allowed to say that. We won't reject it though. But yeah, apparently very nice man.
Yeah.
You got to be nice to your chef though.
That is true.
Yeah,
you just spit in your face.
Exactly. It's very unfair to put Tyra Banks on a pedestal as though she is the only person in the world who has done this.
And also, I mean, again, to just like be a bit like, maybe cynical is not the right word, but thinking about like this documentary, like what was the purpose of it from the makers? Like, again, yes, everything that we see is edited. And like, again, I'm not giving her a free pass because she could have been a bit more kind of self-aware of some of the contributions that she made to people's misery. But like, I'm also very aware that there's a high chance that like they've edited this in a way, this documentary, that like puts her in a certain light.
That's true.
And equally, like you see conversations like with Simon Cowell, interviews with him, like where like he comes across like a really nice guy, and it's like there's always an angle, there's always a motive.
Yeah.
You know, if Tyra had just sat there and been like really nice and like friendly, like would it have made the documentary like as effective?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And why would we expect that of her? We've seen her on TV for years. When has she ever sat there and been like nice
like
and
a
meek
wallflower?
and friendly?
Yeah.
She's not a wallflower. Yeah, it was a really interesting watch. It made me think a lot. There's a lot of like from Tyra, but also like the discourse on the internet. There's been a lot of like kind of almost turning the finger to point back at the viewers and being like, you're
You
the ones
wanted
who
it.
were watching it. And I think there's like a certain amount of that is true. But I also think that like, you know, there is such a thing as sort of neuroscience, and what makes the human brain tick is something that is like heavily studied so that we can be like marketed to and sold to, and so that these things that are going to fascinate us, even if it's like a morbid fascination, can be really carefully composed so that we can't look away. Because there were certainly times I remember watching America's Next Top Model or other reality TV shows when I wouldn't describe what I was feeling watching it as enjoyment. It was more like that sort of feeling like, you know, when you drive past a burnt out car, like you can't
like
not look.
And also, if we applied that, like, then we ultimately are blaming like the consumer for all the awful content that is online, like for like kids being exploited because oh well, people are watching it, like all of that stuff. And I just don't think that you can put that much responsibility on like the consumer, because like you say, there's a lot that goes into why we watch those things.
And I also do think that like as consumers of content, in the same way as like as consumers of products, we can choose to like vote with our views basically. And if America's Next Top Model came back, which it was hinted like not
Maybe
the right
it is.
place for like a Cycle 25 plug, but if it came back, I think I would be really interested and I would follow the discourse. I think if it was going to be anything like what it was, I wouldn't feel like it was right to watch.
I mean, I'm just not sure it would like wash anyway.
Yeah, I have no idea. Who knows? But there we go. We haven't talked very much about money, but
no, but I guess we've talked about success and like what that looks like, and like the kind of contrast between, I guess, like pursuing your professional financial success, and I guess the ethics of doing that, and whether we hold different people to different standards. But I would love to hear anybody's thoughts on this. I'm sure lots of you have watched it and have got plenty to say about it. So please do let us know if you have any thoughts or feedback or comments.
Yeah, you can come find us on socials at Show Me the Money. You can come follow us on Substack. You'll get a newsletter every Sunday. That's just Show Me the Money. And what else can you do? You can also watch these episodes on YouTube. Just come give us a follow, subscribe, whatever you want to call it. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.